Hey, everybody. As you're joining, go ahead and add your name to the agenda list of attendees. I'm going to paste the link to the talk for you guys. There you go. Oh, whoops, sorry. We're adding them to the wrong day. Hold on a sec, guys. Getting us ahead of ourselves here. One of the problems with having future meetings on there. There you go. Lee, I love that name, SolarWinds. That is just too cool.
You know, it's something of a nightmare for people who don't know, who aren't familiar with the company. They immediately think, oh, yeah, you're into renewable energy and windmills. And,
Still, I love it. Huh. I just realized, Lee, you're not in the list of members on the doc. I will fix that momentarily. Yes.
Hi, it's Yaron and Reed. I just sent you an email, the presentation for the Nuclio session. So I don't know where to upload it, but
That's a good question. I don't know if we have an upload spot, but we can definitely make
put
one.
it in like Drive or something.
Yeah, or we could just stick it into the GitHub repo and into like a presentation folder or something like that. Yeah. Are you able? I don't have your email yet. Are you able to share your screen? I don't get
Yeah,
it.
I'll share it in Zoom, but in addition, if people wanna.
Yeah, I'll upload it at some point.
Let's see, maybe I can do a public link on Dropbox. Just a second.
and then, Doug, if we can digress for even another second, I'll say that it's such an issue for us at SolarWinds, explaining that one of our engineers came up with this explanation. You get wind from the solar winds from the sun, and we turn that into electricity with a giant cable coming down to Earth. That it's just,
I like that.
Yeah.
That's great. All right. Let's see. Let's give people just another minute or so while I frantically try to write down people who are on the call. Hold on.
Yeah.
Yeah, hi. I'm actually in transit right now, so I can't talk too much, but I can listen. It's Elliot.
Okay, who was that?
Elliot.
Oh, Elliot. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, tell you what, it's 4 past the hour. Why don't we go ahead and get started? Before we jump into the meat of the agenda, Alex, you wanted to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Alex Salkever. I am a senior consultant working with LF and Dan Cohn on CNCF stuff. And my background is in product marketing. I spent time at Mozilla, Joyent, a bunch of other places. And Chris Anichek had asked me to volunteer to help out with the white paper that I guess is moving through the serverless working group. And also just thoughts on marketing CNCF serverless topics.
All right.
I'll be on some of the meetings here, and probably be seeing a lot of you in email.
Cool. Thank you very much. Welcome to the group. Glad to have you. All right. So first up on the agenda is a demo from Yaron. Are you able to, let me see, you're not showing your screen yet, are you? No, you're not. Yaron, are you able to share?
Yeah, I'll share. Just a second.
Okay.
Let's put PowerPoint on.
And as a reminder, while he's doing that, I think if you haven't added your name to the agenda or to the list of attendees for today, please do so. There's another link to it in the chat. Oh, hey, Sarah. Yeah, we'll get to you. If I forget, please jump in there. I have a horrible memory.
Okay, so we'll actually do 2 shares. I'll share more of the presentation, and then Eran will do the actual demo. I'm actually in New York at Strata. Okay, do we want to start or wait for someone?
Nope, go ahead.
Okay, so what we wanted to do is explain the architecture and especially some of the more unique attributes in Nuclio. Our intention is not necessarily to look at it as a holistic solution, but some of the components that we'll discuss could actually be reused by others, or we can sort of try and absorb other components from other projects. So it's important to understand some of the modeling that we've done. We can try and propose some of those common APIs that we've developed internally as a baseline for some of the things that we're trying to discuss in the working group. So I'll start with sort of a very high-level architecture of what Nuclio is. So essentially what we started doing that, we had a previous version which was proprietary, and then about a year ago we decided to open source it and sort of rewrote the entire code. And in order to make it more open to other data sources, event sources, and be more modular for future use cases. What's some essential things in the architecture? It's a real-time system. It has sort of notions of zero copy, zero context switches, no garbage cleaning, all those aspects that come from real-time. This is why its performance is so high. We did want to address all the aspects of lifecycle, so versioning. How do we test in one place and deploy in another place, because we have a lot of IoT use cases. We wanted the data and event sources to be pluggable without impacting the function, because we use functions, for example, to do backup jobs in our systems. So I want to just plug the right data set that I want to back up as a parameter. I don't want to rewrite my application. Same for events. We want to trigger the same function, sometimes for testing from an HTTP event and sometimes from a stream or a message queue. And the general idea is that it needs to be portable, pretty much like with the Amazon Lambda. You can do Greengrass, you could do Snowball Edge, you could do in the cloud. So here it's even a bit more modular because you can run it on a laptop, on a Raspberry Pi, on many other platforms. So that was our requirements for the system. It's divided to, so the main component is the processor, which is the thing that wraps the function. I'll dive a bit more into it. This processor is wrapped by, on one side, something called event listener, which intercepts the events from the different types of data sources. And then you have a notion of data binding, which is the thing that binds with the different data types, like databases, stream, etc. And on the control layer, we have several components. It's not necessarily bound to Kubernetes, but when it's the current implementation of controller is over Kubernetes, it could be, this is, I think, the only component that is tied to the underlying platform. There's another component, which is the builder function, also runs in a container and builds the artifacts. There's something called dealer, which I'll explain. It's a thing that allows the dynamic association between various things like jobs and shards and tasks and functions. And there's also aspects of user interface. One is the CLI, the other one is pretty much like a Go playground, and we'll see how it works. So that's the general architecture. If we dive further into the processing engine, so the event listener, you essentially implement a sort of a class that implements the event listener. There are four types of event listeners because they define the behavior of the entire workflow. And then under a class, you have different implementations. So if you go through the code, you'll see that there's like synchronous, asynchronous, stream, and polling implementations, or so we're probably going to generalize it as batch jobs, the polling one. And under those, there are different transport implementations. Because synchronous is like a request and reply, has one behavior. Asynchronous is sort of independent set of asynchronous messages and things that we discussed. You know, streaming is sort of a continuous stream of messages with ordering and potentially sharded. So those are the plugins. They're implemented in a way that you can actually have zero copy all the way and zero context switches all the way from the event source to the function. And the other side, you have the data bindings. We still need to do some more work on that. So currently, sure, the Amazon APIs and our v3.io is supported, but in a few weeks, we'll add all the rest of the things in the list here. This processing runtime have abstraction of the interface to the platform. So this is why it can run over different platforms. So all the things around logging and runtime have abstract interfaces, which, you know, if the group wants, we can start and standardize them. And I'll touch on some of them, especially like logging and others. And the function itself runs in the runtime engine if it's, because all the infrastructure is designed around Golang. So if it's Golang, it's sort of inline Go routines. If it's other languages, then it's there are a few invocation mechanisms. One is like a bash, the other one is like a Unix sockets, and there's also going to be a shared memory implementation. So it's not like some of the platforms where it's like CGI that you invoke the process. The process or the workers are kept live, and then you sort of just inject the message and get events and other responses from the function. And also another unique thing is that the function we have multiple workers on a single process, and this allows us to get very high concurrency and also enable this very high performance. Okay, so if, for example, you're driving the function with HTTP requests, and those HTTP requests are blocking on I/O or something, then we'll actually be launch multiple workers concurrently to deal with all the remaining requests.
I have a question here. Sorry to interrupt. So when your event comes, the event listeners get the event. So are you going to have that function workers running there all the time, or you are going to at that time instantiate a function? A compute resource to host that function worker?
So this, what you're saying here, the function processor is a process. Okay, it is live. The orchestration layer needs to decide if it needs to be live. And if, for example, this is in the doc, we refer to something called starter. So if the function is down, someone else intercepts the HTTP request, loads the process, and then ships the message into the process. In case of message queues, it's slightly different. But the idea that the process already has the runtime worm. You don't necessarily have to have all the workers up. You could sort of have 0 workers, so consume less memory if you want, and then start building the workers dynamically as the workload arrives.
Oh, so basically you have a warm compute resource there.
Yeah, but it doesn't have to be alive. It could be taken down.
Yeah, right. But for the first event, right? You you have to cold start, right?
Yeah, if you're doing a cold start, then something else will intercept the event and would sort of launch, tell the controller to launch the process.
The idea is that you could have both. You can have a configuration of a cold start or a warm start, depending on your function YAML.
We have in the presentation also the YAML definition and the CLI definition. You could see that there is a minimum and maximum replica definition. So minimum could be 0 or could be higher number in order to preserve SLA. So that's yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
So that's on this. So we discussed all those different sort of implementations of model. Sorry.
Sorry, I still have a question. You just mentioned, I think say it could be either cold or warm. Is that configurable?
Yes, yes, and you could even decide how warm you want, how many instances needs to be up.
So you leave that to the user to configure it. It's not that your system automatically decide.
No, because what we see is sometimes we deal with low latency use cases where people would prefer to pay some more for the resources and launch and have sort of a zero latency. And we've seen latencies of sort of 0.1 millisecond on the system on invocation, and so. We don't want to add another 100 or a few hundreds of milliseconds in some cases to the invocation. Okay.
Yeah, but so are you then, because you already have...
But let's, Karen, because we don't have a lot of time, let's table some of the discussion, some of the questions to the end, okay? So one unique element that we've, initially we started working with stateful sets in order to deal with the sharding challenge of how do you distribute multiple shards to multiple functions. And eventually we decided to have something which is more dynamic. It's called the dealer. Essentially what you do, you submit a job and you tell the job how many tasks. And tasks could be very different things. Could be a number of active shards. It could be if you're, sometimes serverless doesn't feed batch jobs. Let's assume you want to do ETL. ETL is too long for a serverless function. So you may want to break the table to 1,000 smaller slices. Each one of those will run independently and checkpoint. So if you fail, you sort of start from the same point. So the general idea is that you break a job into a bunch of tasks, as many as you want. There are all sorts of metadata things like, how many tasks can a process do concurrently, etc. And the dealer deals with sort of dynamically distributing the shards or the job tasks among the actual functions. Every time there is something is restarting, it will reallocate. It's actually not really working from the definition of what's up and down. It's looking at the deployment expected number, because what happens if you have a pod that just restarted, you don't want to redistribute all the shards, and then a second after that the pod went up and you redistribute again. So we watch both events of up-down events as well as deployment scale change events, okay? So that's a very generic mechanism. It's actually not tied to Nuclio, so we can use it even in other microservices. Okay, any questions on that?
I have a question on this. So when you say the job, you divide it into tasks, are those tasks the same task or running in parallel, or they are different tasks?
So they could run in parallel depending on the metadata. You see maximum task per process or and min-max processes and all those parameters, or they could run in sort of a cascading, like I have 1,000 tasks and I'm limited to only 4 processes. So essentially I can give every process like 5 tasks. They finish 2, they get another 2, etc. Okay, so but the general idea is that we have, for every task there is a single worker thread or worker routine, not a process. So, and that maintains also the checkpointing of that stream or task or all those things.
So those tasks could perform different work, right?
Yeah, you can essentially run the same function with multiple jobs and each one with multiple tasks. But again, I think we can have an entire hour just about the sort of the dealer architecture. So let's just leave it at that. One of the use cases that we demonstrate this week at Strata is that by having serverless functions that first are so fast and real time and have those native data bindings to data, and have this sort of ability to go beyond just sort of a simple event-driven to also sharding and stream processing and batch jobs, then essentially it can replace almost anything in the setup. So this is a traditional pipeline that we work with customers. You get feeds from whether it's operational databases like ETL or CDC or stream. You do all the pre-processing on those streams, like denormalization, aggregation, prediction for machine learning against a data source. You could do all the complex event processing with those. You could do all the data movement, from one repository to the cloud and back. You could do even the APIs that serve the dashboards. And essentially, you also have other services in our platform that deal with like machine learning or Spark or other things, which are, those will be sort of continuous services that have their own, APIs and TCP ports, etc. So now this approach of advancing the serverless to a broader scope helps us to use it in sort of almost any place. Okay. And this is one example that I'll show in a minute, that how we essentially take an event, do parallel enrichment across multiple tables, do complex event processing, work against like 4 different streams and tables and geomaps, 60 lines of code, all of that example. I won't dive into the next few slides. It will be something that you could look at after. This is the definition of the job spec, and there are different points into the sort of unique aspects of things like data binding. You can notice it's a Kubernetes CRD. So essentially, you can do kubectl create of a bunch of things and functions in the same command. There is this definition of events that are shipped into the function. This is also something worth discussing, because this is part of how we see generalizing the event structure across multiple forms of events. This is the logging interface. We also suggest to sort of standardize the logging interface. Today we have different implementations for the logging interface, like print to the screen, pass it through HTTP, write to a file, push it to an event stream. This is another thing that I wouldn't like to have us maintaining everything. And if we can form a generalized model here and everyone agrees to it, then we can have people creating sort of plugins for logging, for stream logging. And one uniform interface. And there's also other things like the generalized data binding APIs and others. You can always overwrite it. So with that, I'll move to the demo. Eran, can you, I don't know how I'll pass you.
Sure.
Any questions until sort of Eran gets organized?
So
we
I
have about 5 more minutes. You're on.
Okay, we'll try and rush it.
Thank you.
And by the way, we're really open to, if you think things in our model are not, we haven't done a good job, then we're open to change code and change models. Okay, so good. So Eran will show us a model, will show us the demo. One of the things that I mentioned that Nuclio comes with a built-in sort of a playground, pretty powerful. So it's essentially Kubernetes deployment. You just launch it and it works standalone. You could launch as many as you want in parallel. And what so Eran, let's start with show a simple Python. So you could see you write the function. A simple Python, you get invoked by the event and the context. The context also gets you the logging. The logging is both structured and has different levels. And then you just compile the function, run it. From the same playground, you can actually also invoke it. And you could see that the return response could be either structured or unstructured. If instead of putting a structured response, I'll just put a string, it will also respond. You just won't have the flexibility to control all those things like return status, etc. And with the logging level, you can actually control in real time what kind of log messages are going to be shown to the user or be written to the log stream. Okay, so if I have a same function with different levels of logging, and I happen to run into a challenge, I'll just sort of turn on debugging and run. Okay, So that's around that. Maybe let's show a different function now in Go. Okay, and this you could see again also all the notion of logging, structures, status, etc. And maybe you can show us the performance, Aaron.
Sure.
So what you'll see in Nuclio is also integrated with Prometheus, and we have our own tool for HTTP benchmarking. It's a pretty fast tool, generates about 800,000 HTTP requests per second. It's open source. And what you can see while we're running the function, we can run Prometheus, and also look at the HTTP Blaster event, and you'll see the results, hopefully.
Yeah, we're running an empty function that just returns nothing.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's just running, and Prometheus is going to update in a second.
Okay. So what you could see is that a single process currently running about 400,000 events per second. That's probably faster than anyone writing his own function, because usually developers don't have the time to deal with all those low-level optimizations. Okay, so that's around that. Maybe around, can you show us also how you invoke same function from different sources?
Yeah.
So as we mentioned, the same function signature is exactly the same across multiple types of sources. You can subclass it and extend stuff, but it's pretty comprehensive. So the nice thing is I can take the same function that I just invoked with HTTP and now invoke it through RabbitMQ. Okay, because I ask the function to listen on both asynchronous and synchronous data. I can do exactly the same from Kafka or NATS or Kinesis or RV3IO. Okay, so what Iran did is a function that sort of the RabbitMQ writes to something, and then sort of in HTTP, just to show you that it happened, is reading the content. So just to prove that it was actually running.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's on this. Maybe Iran can show us also the more comprehensive Go test. So until now, we sort of just played with sort of stuff, but you can see that I mentioned to you this real-time IoT demo that intercepts car messages and does real-time enrichment with other data sets. This is the code. You can see the first line is the data binding. We're actually having in the definition language, we're saying DB0 equals to a certain data type, certain security credentials, etc. And then that already is sort of bound to my context. And what I do here is we also have sort of like pandas or data frame, Spark data frame implementation similar to that in Python, in Go, sorry, for real time. It's also going to be open source. And you could see that what I'm doing here, I'm doing parallel read from 4 different tables, cars, drivers, road information, doing all sorts of decision making underneath, and to update geomaps, to update car driver violation streams, all that stuff. The last line, by the way, you could see that it sort of waits for completion because everything here happens asynchronously. All those 5 different updates to 5 different streams and tables happens concurrently. So that's why the last row is essentially like waiting for all those things to complete. So you could see that very few lines of code, I managed to do something that in traditional stream processing will take multiple components and won't be as elastic. And this is an elastic function. I could test it with HTTP and then drive it into a production stream using Kinesis or Kafka or anything else. So that's and that. Maybe we'll have a few minutes. Just let's show the CLI because I want to show also its pretty comprehensive features around versioning. So I hope we have 2 more minutes for that. So just show us. So there is a full-blown CLI. You could see there are so many options when you want to invoke a function. You could decide where do you want to have the repository. So think like IoT use cases, you deploy and run a function, create an artifact, and then you want to spread the same artifact to multiple edge devices. You could do that. You could just go through the functions and you could have labels on functions, and you could do select by labels. You have versioning. You could do logging. As I mentioned, the logging level, you can control it, execute functions with different logging levels. Maybe show us the publishing feature for the versioning.
Just did.
Oh, okay. So the nice idea is that let's assume I tested the function, everything is cool. I want to now label it and tag it. So that's the publishing feature. And what I'll do with the event source, I will define which sort of label selector or which version or alias I want the event to drive. So now I could have event source, a stream that's the production stream and matches with the production function. And in parallel, I'll have a different function just for testing, and I'll invoke it with HTTP or another stream. Okay, so that's the general idea. You can update a bunch of things to each one of the versions, like environment variables. You could label functions and all those things. So it's very comprehensive. We'll probably won't have time to get into all those things. Good. So thanks, Aran, for.
No problem.
Yep. Okay.
And
so
if anyone wants a deeper dive, because that's really short for 20 minutes to see everything, then we're open to that.
Yep, and thank you very much for rushing through that. I appreciate it. It looks like really, really cool stuff, so thank you. And maybe we'll have some time for additional questions at the end of the call. But I do want to make sure we get back to the meat of the agenda, which is the white paper.
Yeah, and in the presentation, I did list all the classes. I do want people to poke into that, and because this could be a baseline for more interoperating and more joint work.
Yep. All right, cool, thank you. All right, so first on the agenda is a gentle reminder. People have been trying their best to address comments in the doc itself. Ignoring this section of what is serverless, the rest of the doc, I think there's less than about a handful of comments that are outstanding. So if there are any comments, suggested edits or something in your section, please try to address them. Don't just leave the comments there. If you think you've addressed it, whether that means actually do what they ask or ignore it or something, or reject it, go ahead and resolve the comments so it disappears from the doc itself. My goal is to try to get 0 comments in the doc really, really soon. So just a reminder of that. So let's now jump to the conclusion section of the doc. And actually, let me go ahead and try to share my screen here. Hold on a sec. Let's see. All right, can you guys see that? Yes?
Yes.
No? Yes. Okay, cool. All right, so the conclusion section first. I wrote this, I guess, maybe 2 weeks ago, and I find it very hard to believe there are 0 comments and that it was actually perfect. So I'm going to assume people just haven't had a chance to review it yet. So rather than taking the time to review it right here, right now, what I would like to do again is just encourage people to please read it as soon as possible, because this is probably the most critical part of the document itself, aside from just educating people in terms of what serverless actually is. Because this is going to be basically our recommendation for the TOC in terms of next steps. And if there's something in here that you disagree with, or you think it's missing something, or it's just flat out wrong, we need to catch this as soon as possible, because aside from the what is serverless section, this section should be the one we spend most of our time on. And it's worrying me that no one's commented on there, because I know I didn't do that good a job. So are there any high-level things about this people would like to discuss now, or if not, I'll leave it and we can just go back and discuss it next week, but please take a look at some point. So let me pause here. Any high-level comments or questions?
I'm new to the group. I was commenting on the docs a bunch. And I was curious, what are the goals of this? I mean, I can guess a whole bunch of them, but I'm just from the group. What are you trying to achieve with these recommendations, or from you who wrote it?
Right. So the basic goal of the recommendations section is to provide a set of proposals for the CNCF TOC to consider for next steps, whether it's do nothing at all, or it's look for some sort of standardization effort or something in between. That's what we're trying to lay down here as a set of recommendations.
Okay. Well, I guess is the mission to let's have the world adopt serverless, or let's make it easier for serverless providers to create something that makes sense to the people who use the serverless things, which is related but not the same.
But they're all, any of the things you just mentioned there are valid possibilities. The key point here is people need to write down and identify what they'd like to see as an option, and then we as a group can decide whether that's worthy of us saying to the TOC, yes, we like this idea strongly enough that we want you guys to seriously consider it.
Great, thank you.
Okay.
I think there's another goal is make the service platform, no matter from which provider, easier for the user to use. Basically, if the user want to migrate their workflow from one service platform to another, it is easier for the users. I think that's another goal.
Yep, definitely. And those are the kind of things that I'd like to see you guys add to the doc itself if I haven't already covered it. Or if you think I have done a poor job of covering it, please edit the text directly there. And like with all other suggestions, please just don't leave a comment saying, hey, it'd be nice if you talked about this. Actually add the actual text in there. It makes it so much easier to review and to understand exactly what you're looking for.
Yeah, I think another point beyond the user is also the ecosystem. Again, if we work with guys developing editors and debuggers and whatever, if we maintain some ability to create a uniform YAML files or a uniform event structure or a uniform debugging mechanism, or at least close in terms of the model, that makes life easier for the ecosystem. And if the ecosystem fosters, everyone wins.
Yep, I would agree with that.
Yeah.
To the second bullet that's there, start new interoperability and portability efforts. I think with respect to the comments Austin has put into chat, there might be some convergence there that Austin may need to edit that.
Yep, I would agree. I haven't had a chance to fully read his comments, but I did see them go by. So yeah, I would agree. But like I said, I don't think we necessarily have to list them out on this call right now, because I think everything you guys are mentioning are great ideas. Let's get them in the doc as actual textual edits. That way we can look at them in context and look at them, review them, and in essence vote or approve or reject them.
Yeah, that's right. I'll add something to the doc. I have another suggestion is in the first bullet. We say we encourage more serverless technology to join CNCF and more open sources project listed. So we should keep this window open, right? Because there could be more providers, open source solutions coming in the future. So how we should, when is this going to be like reported to the CNCF TOC, or what's the timeline? Could we make this timeline longer?
Well, so I don't want to push out necessarily, well, we don't have a formal timeline for the white paper other than try to get it done as soon as possible. But you are correct. We don't want to necessarily lock down everything so that if new projects come along, they can't be added to something. And it's that quote, something that we need to figure out, right? So do we take this document, put it into GitHub so we can have people issue PRs to get their product listed in there? Or do we talk about the next subject, which is, which is create a table someplace where we actually list these things, and this is a living, breathing document of the various projects and tools and services and stuff like that. That might be the place to list it, is in this landscape document rather than the white paper itself. So that's something else we need to discuss.
Yeah, I think that was the agreement last time. Yeah, we wanted this to be kind of the living document, the Google Doc that's kind of updated, and we're basing this on what the the storage working group has done, and that they had success with, according to Chris. Yeah, I think the key shift that we have right now is getting the white paper in a good enough state to get out the door so we can actually start working on some implementations, some code first type of stuff rather than too much in terms of, generic wording and stuff.
Right. So one question I had for the group, because I wasn't completely sure what we agreed to last time. Hold on a minute. Where is it? Darn, Zoom is taking off my darn screen. Hold on a minute. Okay. So when we talked about creating this spreadsheet, did we agree to remove the appendix from the document that listed some of these things out and only have the spreadsheet? Or did we say the document was going to be sort of like a snapshot of right now, but the living document, the living, breathing side of things would be the spreadsheet?
My opinion is to replace.
Okay.
And just put a pointer in the document to this spreadsheet.
That'd be my preference as well, but I don't want to. I don't remember us formally deciding that for sure last time. That's why I wanted to ask. Is there any objection to removing those sections from the document and just having the spreadsheet, just add a pointer?
Yeah, I think pointer makes sense. I think otherwise we have to always sync up to, right?
Yes, that's why I was agreeing with that. Yeah, I agree. Okay.
Yeah, And even if the GitHub, even if this thing moved from being a document to being a living document in GitHub, I think it would be a separate item anyway. So to keep it external from this makes sense on two fronts.
Okay, so let's go ahead and talk about this spreadsheet over here itself. So Mark, I think you might have been the last one to touch it. You want to sort of talk to it for the group?
Sure. Instead of having things all on the same sheet, it made sense to us to break out what are the projects that are delivering more serverless types of orchestration platforms, function schedulers, executors, split out development tools, and then there's a services tab as well to list out, what are the recommended or preferred applications that you would tie into for event sources that are known to be interoperable with some of the function executors, just in terms of eventing, et cetera. That was our first pass. Doug and I collaborated on this, and we would love to have input.
Yep. So obviously, since you guys are just seeing this for the first time now, I don't expect a whole lot of comments, but please look at the doc, make suggestions.
Do you want to paste the link out?
Yeah, actually, it's in the doc itself, but you're right. Let me so here's the link in Slack. And hold on a minute. It's in the meeting minutes as well, right here. Yeah, but I know you guys haven't had a chance to really look at this, but as a starting point, does it seem like it's at least headed in the right general direction and we just need to do some tweaks?
I think so. I think the one thing that it might be missing that we discussed last time was just a matrix of feature comparisons, but I think that's what you have here is a good start.
Okay, let me make a note of that in a minute. Hold on a minute. I'm sorry, what was that? Okay, maybe somebody's just mumbling. Okay, any other comments on this? Obviously, please comment as you can on the doc itself. Okay, so let's switch over now to the exciting what is serverless section. Just out of curiosity, did Chris Munns join the call? Okay, I didn't think I saw him. Okay, so Sarah, thank you for your edits there. I personally like the direction you took it. The question is, I think it's going to be more for Chris than anybody else, because he was on the other side of the fence in terms of what to present here, is whether this is going to be still along the lines of what he can live with in terms of Amazon's view of things. But maybe you can talk to what kind of changes you made here and sort of the directional shift that you made in there, because I like, for example, the developer versus provider split. So maybe you can talk to a little bit about that for those who haven't had a chance to read it.
So as I read the doc, it felt like it was mostly focused on developer use cases, right? The person using the serverless platform. However, I think the working group is primarily represented by people providing serverless platforms. So I think there's just those two perspectives, which was just a clarification. And before getting involved in like actually serverless platform creation, I've attended the IAW, the Internet Identity Working Group workshop several times, and there's a bunch of people who attend that who are passionate about the personal cloud movement. And also I work on I lead part of the Firebase team at Google, which includes both our BAS products and the connection with cloud functions. And so from my sort of prior experience in open source and in the industry, there's this perspective of like making something that can run anywhere or making something that I can run myself, where if I'm running it myself, I'm kind of acting as both the provider and the developer. But those are still two separate concerns. And I was kind of recalling also something I didn't know quite how to put in the doc because I couldn't find a good reference to was unhosted web apps seemed very relevant in some way. So this was just a way of attempting to clarify what was already there. And I refrained from actually, I believe, changing anything. Rather to separate the things that are clearly not controversial, which is like zero ops, everything is managed for you as the developer deploying the function, right? And then there's this other concern, which is as the developer using this platform, what are my costs? And so I'm really interested in the working group thinking like, what does the business model have to do with anything? And at first I wanted to strike it because most of the doc I was considering under a technical lens. And then I realized that anecdotally, a lot of the developers that I've talked to are, and seen use our products, are excited about it's the business model of serverless that drives their usage of it as much as it's developer cost and dollar cost, right? You make a trade-off there. And so I think it is actually very relevant, but I could see it being excluded or included in this particular working group. And so I'm really intrigued about what other people think about, like, are we focused, is part of serverless its business model?
Interesting question. So are there any comments, responses to that?
I'd like to comment and say thanks for the split between provider and developer. I think that's a very, very good point, and it's worth mentioning.
Yeah, I think we had that originally somewhat in the abstract, right? We wanted to call out who the target audience was for this paper. And I think we did, we agreed that it was, Sarah, like you said, there's two different audiences, right? There's that developer with the point of view of serverless, and there's also, especially given the open source projects, right? Those people that are providing and may want to host and learn about that. I think that, that could be crisper in the paper, but I think we've gone back and forth on it a couple times, but I definitely think it should be there, right? So clearly, this is who we're targeting, and this is who we're talking about when we mention certain things.
Yeah, and I think the key thing is, like, I don't think anybody would argue, like, clearly there are costs for the provider. Like, clearly the provider will always have a cost even when it's idle. And so I think that that's off the table. And then the question is, should we be concerned about costs, and what does that mean?
Yeah, I was a little vocal on the Slack on that, but again, whatever we decide, I'm open to that. But let's assume that now a cloud provider goes to a large customer, says, you know what, you're gonna get 1 million invocations for free every month, okay? Or you're gonna get sort of a site license for invocation if you put $1 million in front of me. So now you're not gonna call it serverless?
So right. But then go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to interject a different comment, which is you talk about audience, and I tend to think of it as more personas in terms of what are their responsibilities and what are their concerns. Just thought I'd add that comment.
Mm-hmm.
So does it have to? See, to me, when I see the word cost, I can understand why someone would look at that and see dollar signs. But to me, when I see the word cost, I actually tend to think more about resource usage. And I'm wondering whether it'd be less controversial to talk about resource usage instead of using the word cost, which implies monetary things.
But as Sarah indicated, there is actually always resources, whether it's a HTTP gateway listening on an event, whether it's some stuff that is waiting on cold start or whatever. There's always some resources. And I think what's here is more about the business model of, am I going to charge just per invocation? Or even today, that's not correct, because even Amazon provides X amount of free invocations per month, okay? So how does that fall into there's no cost when idle?
Right, but that's why I like the idea of splitting provider versus developer, because obviously, yes, to the provider, there's always resource usage even when idle, but that doesn't necessarily mean the developer is exposed to it. And I thought that was the key point of serverless. or one of the key points of serverless. So whether they actually charge you for it or not, whether they actually charge you for the resource usage or not, isn't the point. It's whether there is resource usage associated with the developer, and then the cost model is a completely different issue.
Yeah, I think I agree with that. Because I think different. I'm just wondering whether we need to be so restrictive. I think different vendors probably will have different cost model, but the resource will be usage will be common, right? No matter what kind of cost model. Even the function is not running, there will be some resource being used, especially if it's a complicated workflow, right? There will be the platform, the provider will have resource to manage that workflow. At one side is, the provider might not charge for some resource usage, even that function is running. And on the other side, some provider might charge, for the platform usage of managing the whole workflow. Even that function is not running yet, but maybe like warm start or whatever. So I'm just wondering whether we should really make it so restrictive or not.
I think it's problematic. If you say it's for developer resources, then warm start cannot be counted as serverless because he already has the resource for it no matter what. So are we saying that even someone that does warm start, it's not serverless anymore because it costs a resource for the developer?
I agree with that. Yeah, that's my point too. So that's why I think we should not be so restrictive, say, talk about this cost. I think, different vendor might have different cost model. Talking about the resource probably is better.
So that raises an interesting question, because it seems to me that a lot of the back and forth that we've had recently is around, is it absolutely zero cost / resource usage as seen by the developer, or is a minimal amount as seen by the developer just because the thing's warm? Is that okay to still be called serverless? Am I correct in that's basically the gist of the disagreement here?
Right.
I don't know that I agree with that, because from a developer point of view, they don't know or care whether it's warm or not.
Well, no, but okay, so remove the word warm from that. I guess the question then in my mind is, okay, do you have to get down to zero cost / resource usage in order to be serverless? Or can a minor blip still count as your serverless?
Yeah, I think that's key. I think I will agree, we do not say absolutely no cost when idle, because there could be, when the function is not running, there might be some cost, minor cost. It depends on even Amazon currently, it charges, as I said, on one side, it will not charge you when your function is really running, not idle. It gives you some free runs. But on the other side, for the step function, it charges a platform cost, even your function is not running, because for step function, there's a group of functions.
Right. So I know that there are definitely some people in this working group who believe serverless equals absolute zero, right? And I believe there are other people on the call who don't want to be quite as strict and want to allow for something greater than zero. And what that number is greater than zero, I don't know. I think it might vary, but they want to allow for at least something a little bit greater than zero. Is that fair?
No, I think that we're again, whatever we'll decide, I'm okay with that. But I think we're missing the point. The experience, the operational experience, is the thing that important. It's not what you pay. Is as an operation guy, I don't need to manage servers. That's the important point. I want to run a function. I click something. I deploy a function without thinking about the OS that I need to deploy, without thinking about the Docker containers. I think that's the core thing, not how you're going to charge me. And business models are flexible. Tomorrow one cloud provider will come with one approach for pricing, and all the others, a few weeks after will say, yeah, we too. So why are we so strict?
But also we're looking at this purely on a technical point of view in nuancing it, whereas serverless is also being used as a generic term throughout the industry to encompass both. And I think that's playing into this as well. that I know I've talked with some of the open source projects, and they feel that they provide serverless from a developer point of view, regardless as to whether they can who's operating it.
Yeah, you're on, at least speaking from the IBM side of things. I think if we were to take the approach of dropping the, I guess it's now the second bullet there, the absolute no cost when idle, or dropping a discussion of that from this definition, as I think you're proposing, I think we would probably have a problem with that, because to us, part of serverless is this getting down to zero resource usage, zero cost, whatever you want to call it. It is getting down to that aspect. Whether you want to call it a business model or not, it does play a role in our view of what serverless means to the industry.
And this is Arun. I know Chris is not on the call, but for Amazon perspective, Chris made those 3 points very clear. Zero servers to manage, absolutely no cost when idle, except stateful storage and instant scalability. So I'm trying to ping Chris. He's in a customer meeting right now. I think those are the 3 tenets that we would like to stick to as well.
Right. So let me ask you this, because what I'm trying to figure out is, let me pick on your own for a sec, just because it's fun to pick on one particular person. Do you think it's possible to find wording that you could live with that still keeps a discussion of that second bullet point?
Yeah,
or
I wrote you first. It's okay. I don't get offended easily. I think the compromise could be to strike out the absolutely on one end, and also add the usually, as I wrote you. And again, it's not my definition. I think the definition should not focus on what you price, and I'm willing to bet with most of you that the pricing models will change over time. But I think an acceptable thing is to strike out the absolutely and write usually on the no costs. So then no one is violating. So if you but as we said, even Amazon has some freebie serverless time that you get for, and it doesn't meet that definition.
I think Chris too proposed that getting rid of absolutely was okay according to the Slack channel.
Yeah, I remember that.
That part was, I think, fine.
Yeah, if it's possible for, I'm sorry, I can't remember the gentleman's name who was working with Chris, but if you can check with Chris to see how he would feel about adding the word usually into that sentence.
Yeah, I will do that. Yeah, my name is Arun, and I will talk to Chris. I've already sent a message to him, so as soon as he responds back, I will sync up with him. If we change the word from absolutely to usually, would that be okay with him?
No, to be clear, dropping the word absolutely and then adding the word usually in the first sentence like I'm showing on the screen.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, okay.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I see that as sort of a compromise, because again, it's not the way I see the world, but I think it allows the maneuvering for the guys that so want to stretch the model to a different place.
Yeah, and I'd like everybody else obviously on the call, because obviously there's more than 2 players here beside Yaron and Chris. I'd like everybody else on the call to think about whether they can not say this is perfect, but whether it's something they can live with. Because I think we're probably reading it far more precisely than most people will probably read it. But
one of the questions I would like to ask the group is there anybody from other cloud vendors, who has gone through this definition? And I would like to get their assessment of this definition as well.
Like I said, from the IBM point of view, when we read Chris's definition, we were okay with it.
Is there anybody from Microsoft or Google on the call, who can comment upon this definition?
So this is Sarah from Google. I noticed from that Antonio, who's been more active in this working group, was strongly advocating absolutely no cost when idle. So I'd like to check in with him and get his thoughts on, sort of the backstory there. I could see it argued different ways, but I think I still don't understand what we're talking about. We've talked about resources and we've talked about business model. And so it's not clear to me whether this paragraph is actually about the cost model for the developer. What they, whether it's in dollars or in deals or in whatever, is it actually about the business model, which can apply to internal, things. right? Or I could say like, when the developer is not the same as the provider, then blah, 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 right? Because I'm just curious about that, because of this persistent, like, we're seeing this huge adoption based on actual dollar cost interest, right? And having things scale to zero is an important characteristic for a lot of Firebase developers, right? They have apps in development, or they have mobile apps, or they have spiky traffic, they have only weekend traffic or only weekday traffic. And so the dollar cost when idle actually is a big deal, which it would be fine if it were completely excluded. But right now, even if you remove the absolutely, I don't even know what this paragraph means.
Okay, we're almost out of time, and I want to be respectful of the clock. So let me do a couple of things here. First, because Chris spent a lot of time and effort trying to word this section very, very carefully, that's why I've been very nervous about accepting Sarah's edits, even though I really like them. So Arun, can you check with Chris to see if he's okay with the edits that Sarah made? Because I don't think she actually changed any of the controversial bits. All she did is move things around, I think.
I will.
Okay, so because we can at least get the syntactical changes that she made in there agreed to or not, I think that'd be really useful. That way other people can make their own minor tweaks if they think it's necessary. Now, Sarah, to you, to your question about what this paragraph actually means, can we take that to the Slack channel or email or something like that? Because I'm not quite sure what other clarity you're looking for, so maybe you can ask for which bits need to be clarified to you. And conversely, yeah, you already did this a little, but do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Sarah Allen. I joined Google about 1.5 years ago, and about 9 months ago took responsibility for the parts of Firebase that overlap with Google Cloud. So Firebase is Google's mobile platform and gives direct from mobile access to Google Cloud Storage, as well as the Firebase real-time database, and a number, like 12 different products that are not cloud products. So, so my excitement about this working group is really around our functions effort, where originally from the mobile perspective, we came to like, well, mobile developers want just to have a little bit of function in the cloud. And then what I'm seeing is that mobile developers have the exact same needs as everybody else, because the back ends of mobile apps are incredibly complex, and almost every enterprise has mobile app. So it's just a really interesting space to me. We're very active in, sort of, we have a lot of different events that trigger functions, and I'm been a long time on the internet, but new to this space, so I'm really excited to be involved.
All right, cool. Well, thank you. Happy to have you here, especially with all the great edits you made to the doc. I really appreciate that. And with that, I'm going to have to call it time because we're definitely out of time. And we'll talk again next week. And please look at that conclusion section, make some edits. We need that get done relatively soon. All right?
Yeah.
Thank you,
Take
guys.
care, man.
Okay,
Thank
you.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye.